Across boardrooms and political campaigns, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power is treated as a modern Machiavellian operating manual. Executives, politicians, and pop culture icons regularly cite it as an accurate reflection of how the world actually works. The text presents its 48 rules as absolute, undeniable physics of human behavior. It builds this case almost entirely on historical anecdotes, drawing from classical strategy texts and the political maneuvers of Renaissance courts. Those historical anecdotes are compelling in isolation. We have to ask, though, what remains of these rules when we pull them out of a 16th century royal court and cross-examine them using modern behavioral science, psychology, and game theory? The empirical data reveals a consistent pattern. Competence rarely fails on its own. It is the social framing of that competence that dictates success or ruin. These laws are not universal physics. They are highly volatile, context-dependent tactics. Applied in the correct adversarial setting, they function. Applied in the wrong environment, they will actively dismantle the user's influence. The book begins with Law 1, never outshine the master. The premise is that displaying excessive brilliance or competence in front of a superior invites resentment and retaliation. To understand why this happens, we look at social comparison theory. Humans evaluate themselves relative to nearby others, not in absolute terms. In what researchers call the friend paradox, psychological closeness actively amplifies the threat. A boss's self-concept is threatened far more by a direct subordinate's rapid success than by a competitor across the country. Dominance hierarchies in social species are frequently policed emotionally rather than rationally. An insecure leader will sabotage a high performer to restore their own psychological equilibrium. However, organizational psychology shows this dynamic is highly conditional. Studies on psychological safety demonstrate that emotionally secure leaders operate differently. Because their self-worth is not contingent on relative comparisons, they actively promote talented subordinates who outshine them, recognizing that capable teams secure their own authority. Law 1 is not a universal rule of hierarchy. It is a diagnostic test for a specific superior's insecurity. Following this law universally requires suppressing your own capability, a behavior that research links directly to organizational mediocrity and long-term career stagnation. Law 2 advises the reader to avoid friends, arguing that personal affinity makes honest evaluation impossible, and suggests instead hiring former enemies because they have something to prove. There is a psychological basis for this. Cognitive dissonance theory and the Ben Franklin effect show that when someone who previously opposed you is brought into the fold, they often work unusually hard. They are unconsciously trying to justify the reconciliation to themselves and their peers. Yet clinical trust researchers find a severe limitation here. Trust that has been repaired after a genuine betrayal or intense rivalry is measurably more fragile than trust that has remained intact. Applying structural suspicion toward close allies actively corrodes the social capital that makes long-term cooperation efficient. Constant vetting and paranoia consume resources that would otherwise go toward building durable coalitions. The empirical risk to a power structure comes from unstated assumptions and ambiguous expectations. Clarifying roles and formalizing accountability prevents betrayal far more reliably than treating every friend as a pending liability. Laws 3 and 4 operate in tandem. Conceal your intentions to prevent opposition, and always say less than necessary to project control. History is full of figures who weaponized extreme taciturnity. Leaders like Calvin Coolidge cultivated a restrained, tight-lipped persona that served as a highly credible signal of unwavering authority. This exploits a cognitive glitch known as the ambiguity effect. When humans are presented with sparse information, they instinctively fill the silence by projecting positive or authoritative qualities onto the quiet party. Game theory confirms that concealing your reservation price is mathematically optimal in zero-sum environments, like competitive auctions or military maneuvers. But in collaborative networks, that same concealment is toxic. Extensive studies in marital communication and organizational behavior identify stonewalling and undercommunication as primary predictors of relationship failure. Withholding information breaks the feedback loops required for group problem solving. The inverse approach is often far more effective. By publicly pre-committing to a transparent goal, leaders can use radical transparency to alter the incentives of everyone around them, turning public commitment into a massive source of coalitional strength. Verbal economy and concealment are weapons reserved for adversarial settings. In integrative environments, transparency is an absolute requirement to produce any meaningful joint gains. The final premise we'll examine covers Laws 5 and 6, which demand that you guard your reputation with your life and court attention at all costs, under the logic that being unnoticed functionally caps your power. Signaling theory backs up the importance of reputation. In any social or professional marketplace, reputation acts as a compressed proxy for trustworthiness. It allows potential allies to make fast, low-cost judgments about your reliability without having to test you directly. The danger arises when individuals treat reputation merely as an image to be manipulated. Organizational ethicists track a phenomenon called ethical window dressing, where hyper-focusing on visibility incentivizes appearing ethical over the actual work of being ethical. Reputation is undeniably one of the most consequential assets in repeated social interactions, but managing the image alone, divorced from consistent, verifiable conduct, creates a fragile facade that collapses immediately under close scrutiny. The behavioral science audit makes one thing completely clear. Blindly executing these laws does not make an individual a master manipulator. It creates a rigid, highly predictable operator who is incredibly vulnerable the moment they enter a cooperative environment. The 48 laws are best understood not as universal truths of human nature, but as highly specific, defensive tools engineered exclusively to survive inside adversarial, low-trust ecosystems. True power requires acute situational awareness. It is the emotional intelligence to read the security of the people around you, evaluate the constraints of the organization, and calibrate your behavior to match the reality of the room. The ultimate strategic move is not deception. It is the ability to accurately identify whether you are currently locked in a zero-sum game or operating inside a complex, integrative system. Tactics that conquer a battlefield will quickly destroy a coalition. Knowing exactly what game you are playing and who you are playing it with remains the only universally applicable law of power.